Hello and welcome to the PowerFish podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Fish. And to start, I have a declaration, nay, a promise. For every single comment we get on this video, we will respond. It doesn't matter what it is.
In a future episode, if it's a question, we'll answer it. It could be, I was saying this before we started, it could be literally anything. Comment a question. It could be if you're working on a college level quiz for your final, even though it's not that time of year. If there's a question on it, comment it. If you're working on a PhD thesis,
that's what I was gonna say,
and you're just looking for a question, comment it right now. We'll answer it. You don't gotta like, you don't gotta subscribe, but if you want to see the answer, you probably should subscribe. But just comment. We'll answer it.
We'll be as helpful as we can be, or not be.
Yeah. We'll see when we get there what the questions will be. Comment, we'll answer it. Get subscribed so you can see our answers. I wanted to start this episode with a quote from Jordan Peterson. We have done this before. I sometimes listen to Jordan Peterson's podcast, and he says some stuff, some words that are just so hard to wrap your head around. They're so hard to grasp. I have in the past referred to Jordan Peterson as the master of not getting to the point, because he really runs circles around a point that he's trying to get to.
Yeah, he does.
Before he gets to it. And sometimes that is a hard circle to follow. And sometimes it's fun to just pluck one of the things he says while he's running a circle and try to figure out what the heck he's talking about. Last time, we linked how perception is inextricably linked to motivation. And it took us a while to figure out how that's possible, but we got there and realized, okay, yes, there is no perception that is not linked to motivation. This sort of relates to that. So here we go. He said, data is reality. Okay. Reality is value free, which is to say that data is value free, which we know is, unless there is a human to associate value to it, that is true. Data is just data. Data is reality. Reality is value free. And value is added to the data. If the basis of data is perception, and perception is mission driven, in so much as perception is reality, reality is not value free.
Okay.
Did you follow that?
No.
Okay, me neither. So he concludes what we're trying to get to and how this makes sense is his conclusion is reality, the world around us, is inextricably linked with value. Reality has value. And he's trying, from what I can understand here, to explain how that's possible. Because if your no conscious entity is in there and you look at reality, it's impossible to see value there outside of what we ascribe to it.
Sure. Yeah.
So let's just go this one by one here. So data is reality. That I think is true. If I mean, what are we calling a data point here? You can say our perceptions are data, and if a perception is simply the acquisition of data, the data is coming from just reality.
Data is, let me think about this. Reality is a building block of our perception. You know what I'm saying? It's
reality is fundamental to our perception. right?
Right.
Is that what you're trying to say? Okay.
In a way, yeah, because you can't have perception without reality,
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
and therefore reality
And
is in sense data for perception
okay.
because of
I think
its
I understand that. So let me try and rephrase that in a way that fits my brain. So because the only way that we can perceive is through the data that reality is giving us, in so much that we exist,
yeah.
reality is data, because without that data there would be no perception. So reality is in fact that data. Okay, so data is reality. Okay, we got that. I think we got that.
I think that might have been the easiest one.
That might have been the easiest one. All right, data is reality. Okay, yep, we can get that. Let me keep on that just to even further sort of sand off the edges. Even if we're a brain in a vat right now, our reality is simply the data that is being fed to the brain in that vat. So
Right.
even that reality, even though it might not be the only reality, is simply just data being fed to our brain in a vat in by proxy of perception. So I actually totally agree with that. Data is reality. Reality is value free. I think this one's easy because data without something to give it value is simply just nothing more than just data.
Data is reality, but reality is still its own thing. But reality is. Sorry, what was the prompt again?
It said reality is value free,
Right.
which is counter to the end of this. But
Right, because, and this, I remember where I was going. I totally lost my train of thought, but now I remember. I'm back on the rails. Okay, so our perception is how reality becomes data. And then that conversion creates value. But because reality is a physical, tangible thing, aside from consciousness, in and of itself is value free. Does that make sense?
dude, I'm really trying to use all my brain cells to follow. So let me try and
Here's why you could get okay, here's why I'm saying any of this. Because if you say data is reality and reality is valueless, what you could say is, well, if my processing of reality is the data, my process ascribes value, and therefore reality has value. But what I'm saying is data is the process of reality, reality being its own thing. And that thing, aside from process, is valueless.
okay, yeah. So basically reality void of conscious beings is value free.
Correct.
Okay. So, okay, yeah, I think I'm on board with what you're saying. Given that reality is its own thing and our perception is merely the data that reality is feeding to us, and data is value free, therefore the value part has to fit in at the perception level, which is us, and it cannot fit in prior to that at the reality level.
Reality is value free, but once we process it as quote unquote data, we attach its value.
Okay,
But,
yeah.
But before that
100%, yeah.
process, it is valueless.
Okay. All right. We're getting here. We're getting somewhere. Data is reality. Reality is value free, and value is added to the data. Yeah, we got that. If the basis of data is perception, and perception is mission driven. That's the going back to the perception equals motivation thing. In so much as perception is reality, reality isn't value free. Okay, so let's go back to this. If the basis of data is perception.
Got it. We already established that.
Yes. Basis of data is perception. And perception is mission driven. So let's recap that part. There is no perception without action. There is no action without motivation. Goal-oriented motivation. Therefore, there is no perception without goal-oriented motivation. So just to break that down even further, perception, there is no perception without action. How did we link that one up? So we had the walking past a hot dog stand and perceiving the scent of the hot dog.
Right.
I think is what we were talking about.
So that there is no perception without action. We got hung up on that, I remember. Because the second part, there's no action without goal into motivation. That was easy because we were just like, well, if you're doing something, you're trying to achieve something, that makes sense.
Right.
But
there's no perception without.
But if you perceive something, we had a difficult time figuring out how that reacted. Now, and I think the conclusion we came to was that your perception violates you, as in it penetrates you in a way that is forced upon. So you can't control how your perception gets to you or interacts with you, and it will alter your behavior because that is the nature of our minds.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. So hot dog example. You smell the scent of a hot dog. You're perceiving it. It might not even enter conscious thought, but your brain is still perceiving it. Yeah. That perception there is no if, it will, whether it smells bad, smells good, whatever it is, that perception will be a factor in a future decision. It will be factored in a future decision,
even if it's in a very minute way.
Even if it's in an unbelievably minute way, even if it doesn't enter conscious thought. This can be a start to finish unconscious process. Therefore, because that perception will be a factor in a future action, and you do not make action without motivation to do that action, therefore that perception is inextricably linked to the motivation required to start that action. Okay, got that. Okay, we've got that. Okay,
we got it.
we had to think about how the last Jordan Peterson quote made any sense. Okay, if the basis of data is perception, which we got that, and perception is mission driven, we got that. In so much as perception is reality, reality isn't value free. In so much as perception is reality. Okay, so let's go back to data is reality, which so the data is reality, which to us, that is true.
Yep.
Because without the data, there is no perception, and without our perception, there is no reality for us. So data is reality. If the basis of data is perception, which it is, so perception is reality, which it is. And given that we know perception is not, it's impossible to decouple perception from goal-oriented motivation. Reality isn't value-free. I sort of lost the plot at the end.
You lost the plot there. I was never on the plot. So
okay, so data. We need to somehow get to this reality isn't value-free part. Okay,
so we got the first two bits out of the way, or whatever it was. What was that? There was a turn. What was that phrase?
Okay, if the basis of data is perception, which it is.
Right. We established that.
Okay, yeah. And perception is mission driven, which we understood. It is.
Which
You
it
cannot
has to
perceive.
be.
It has to be. Yeah.
Okay.
Perception. You cannot perceive something without it being in the future linked to a motivation. And okay. So I think here's something that isn't in this super clear. Okay, perception is mission driven. So we don't make action without motivation. And we don't have motivation without a goal. And we don't pursue 100% valueless goals. We would not have a goal if it was 100% value free. Now, that value can be misguided, like the value of intaking as many sweet calories as possible. So I don't think this has to be a good thing, per se. But perception is mission driven.
Do you have? Is this written down somewhere? Can you?
Let me.
I want to look. I want to look at the words. I need to look at the words. I know all the words
somewhere with this.
I know all the words you've said to me, but I need to look at them.
Okay, it's in the Discord. Okay. So where we're at, yeah, you can see it. We're at the part of perception is mission. If the basis of data is perception and perception is mission driven, in so much as perception is reality, reality isn't value free. So what I was saying, perception is mission driven. What I don't think is super clear there is how the value part is being intertwined with the motivation part. So perception, we just summarized, is I can see. I can. If you could cut your brain open right now, I would literally see steampunk gears moving around. Looking at this. Okay, so perception is mission driven. I know I keep saying that over and over again. The motivation is okay, we're attaching value to motivation here. And then we can associate the motivation with the perception. Let's run this backwards. You think you got it?
I think I got it.
Summarize it to me, because I'm speaking, I'm thinking and speaking at the same time. So
okay, we've established that data is reality.
Yeah.
Data is our perception, right?
Yeah, our perception. Yeah.
And data is our perception. But we've also established that, okay, I forgot what we've already established. We have established that perception is data and data is reality.
Yeah.
And therefore perception is reality.
Because without our perceptions, reality does not exist for us.
Right. And since we've also already established that perception by its very nature is mission driven, like it says here, because of the way perception works in our brain.
Right.
Reality has to have value because of the perception that we have with reality. Is that, I'm losing it. I
lost it at the end there.
Here's where I'm drawing a problem with this. Because what Jordan Peter, this makes sense in my head, and I can't get it there. I can't bring it home for some reason. But what I have a problem with this is what he's kind of saying is reality is something that is intertwined within us. And since it's within us, there has to be value, is kind of what he's saying. Because perception is mission driven.
Right.
And that means, and that creates value, I think.
Well, okay, let me try and reduce that. Perception is mission driven. Let me really try and dig into that. Perception. Okay, I'm gonna try to slap the value part onto this. So if we haven't recapped enough each individual word of this. I'm going to do it again. Perception is mission driven in so much that motivation, okay, motivation, what's a requirement of motivation? A requirement of motivation is value. Because if we do not value anything, there will be no motivation to do anything. So, because the value is inextricably linked to motivation, and motivation is inextricably linked to the perceptions you've had throughout life, and the perceptions you've had throughout life is the data that reality provides. Therefore, the perceptions you've had throughout life is reality. Therefore, reality is... I'm losing it.
I did the same thing.
What's the break at that point? Why is that pump so hard to get over?
Because here's the problem. Is because we're trying to convert into reality has value. But what we've done is inseparably tie reality to our own perception. And there is no separator. And that's why we can't bring this home, because you have to acknowledge perception as an integral part of reality in order to assign value. And he's assigning value, and you can't do that if reality remains its own separate entity devoid of consciousness.
Okay, so we can shoehorn a caveat in so much that
because we said this. Remember, we said this. I said
reality is not itself the data.
I didn't even know we were going to get to this, but I made this caveat. I said reality is a thing, and it is the data of our perception, but reality is valueless without perception.
Right.
So it's separate. It's the data of our perception, but only the data of our perception. Now, perception is reality. Perception is our reality.
Right.
But perception is not blanket term reality, because it can't.
Okay, so what this quote needs is at the very end where it says reality isn't value free. It should say your reality isn't value free.
Right.
But here's the thing. We are never, no matter how hard we try, perhaps even with all the infinite AI technology in the world in the future, we are never going to experience reality without our perceptions.
Right.
So, is it not? So it might not be right to literally say reality isn't value free, but for all intents and purposes, you know what I'm saying? Reality.
I see where you're driving, yeah.
Yeah. Because there's never going to, like I said, perhaps even in the infinite future, there's never going to be a technology that allows us to experience outside of our own perceptions.
Right.
We're never going to get to see reality as it truly is.
But in a literal sense, though.
In a literal sense, I don't think reality is value. I don't think there can be value attached to reality without conscious entities.
Yeah,
we are a requirement.
How do you assign value? That's
exactly. We are a requirement.
Because how do you assign value anyway? Well, it can be, sentimental, obviously. A lot of it is due to scarcity, right? But who gives a frick if you don't have a lot of gold in the earth if no one gives a crap about spending currency? or if that's even a
Right.
currency, right? There's no value associated. I think this quote as it stands, I think with your caveat that you added, because then data is reality. Data is our reality,
Mm-hmm.
and reality itself is value free. Value is added to the data. Now that's an interesting turn of phrase there, because
Value is added to the data. So
And I-
he
'cause I
even
didn't-
knows it.
because we didn't. I don't think we really thought about that too much.
No, we didn't. We kind of just went over that.
And value.
So
is
he
added to
even
the
knows
data.
it. He's saying
Okay,
it right there.
Let's read this again in context. So the value is added to the data.
Well, he
If
says
the
okay.
basis of data, if the basis of data is perception, which it is, we established
yeah.
that,
Our perceptions are simply data
and
from
perception
reality.
perception is mission driven, which it is,
Mm-hmm.
in so much as perception is reality. Again, tricky turn of phrase there, but I get what he's saying.
Because data is reality and perception is our data. Perception is reality. For us, perception is our reality. Let's put that in there.
Yeah.
In so much that perception is our reality isn't value free.
I think the caveat is built into value is added to the data, but the last little turn of phrase there kind of kicks you back out of it.
Okay, so he does add this caveat in at the beginning. He says at the beginning, reality is value free. He says that right at the top.
Yeah.
And he says,
does.
and value is added to the data. So he did actually already add this caveat in, but it's
Deep in there.
it's deep in there, yet it's right at the front of it, just screaming at us. See, this is how he talks, though. This is how he talks. This is why it's so hard to just get into what the hell he's saying. Okay, so I think we've gotten to a point of we understand and agree with the quote as a whole. But
Basically, so if I were to summarize this,
I want someone's walking up to you right now and they say, my life is stupid. Nothing matters. There's no value in anything. And then I want you to tell them how there is value in their life and it's unescapable using this quote.
that's what it is. I mean, that's what this quote is.
That's what this quote is saying. Their life is valuable and it's inescapably valuable.
Right.
But if someone walked up to me and said, even though after reading this quote, I know that at an intellectual level, I don't know if I'd be able to just like regurgitate it in a coherent way.
Well, because in order to understand this, you have to go to the other quote that we already talked about.
Right, yeah, because perception is mission driven isn't itself apparent. So there's just so much in this that is just and
You
here's the
literally,
thing.
if you were explaining this, you would literally get to, okay, the basis of data is perception, and perception is mission driven. All right, now hold on. Now we got to talk about this, and you'd go through all that just to be able to finish.
So if someone came up to you and was like depressed and said, yeah, there's no value in my life right now. It's impossible. There's nothing. It genuinely would take you an hour to explain to them how there is and they can't escape it. And here's the thing. He said this as just another throwaway, like passing comment. Like, how does this stuff just go through his head? So I think he has like 150 IQ or something like that. Like this guy's just, that's crazy. This is crazy that he can just say stuff like this as a passing comment. Okay. Well, that was tough.
That one was pretty bad, but I think we got through there.
We got through it in the end, but not without just quite a bit of tumultuous brain activity. Okay. Well, we got that. So there was we talked about at the end of one of our episodes, I can't remember which one it was. In a previous episode, we talked about what a conscienceless human would be.
Yeah, we did.
In our world.
We had a bit of a scuffle on that one.
Right, because you started coming at it from like the free will perspective and how conscious thought can alter future action. It got into a more argumentative state, but I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about this a lot. So, consciousness, right? So, memory is consciousness is psychological continuity is a requirement of consciousness, right? We need to have continuity in our memory. We need to have a past, present, future, because if let's say there's a break in our psychological continuity, a break in memory, like Alzheimer's. Let's just say someone with Alzheimer's. If someone with Alzheimer's is trying to remember something that they did, but their psychological continuity is broken, meaning the memory is just gone now, they would perceive themselves as having not been conscious for that time.
Correct.
Do you think so? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'm not one of these people, so I can't really know that for sure.
I mean, well, okay. So I guess it depends on perception on it. So it's, you either consider yourself not conscious or just simply something you don't remember.
Okay, let's say you black out drunk. You say you drink a lot of alcohol and you black out. You don't experience a blackout when you're you're still a conscious entity when you have blackened out. It's simply a memory thing. Memories stop being stored. So when you wake up the next day, you might as well have just been unconscious that whole time.
Right.
Because if there's a break in continuity from the point you were blacked out to the point you're no longer blacked out, you could have just been asleep the whole time. You wouldn't know. It is the same as being unconscious. But you're not. So, is someone that has blacked out from alcohol exactly what we were describing? Someone walking around because they're not storing memories. The alcohol has literally just gotten rid of that ability. So are we seeing someone that has, if we inject the effects of that alcohol but just take away the alcoholic part, and so they're not drunk but they're still blacked out, so to speak, are we looking at a person that is functioning in society without consciousness?
Well, so they're not making memories, but in this example, you're taking somebody who previously was making memories.
Yeah.
So, but are we saying, okay, so we're saying this person, this hypothetical person has built-in memories, but they're just not making new ones?
Yeah, because that's what blacking out is. Yeah.
Right. But does a person who was always blacked out?
So let's say they blacked out from birth.
So they never made any memories.
Let's just say, let's take this out of the realm of reality and into the realm of
remind me
thought
again.
Experiment.
So it's been a little bit of time since we've talked about this. So
right.
What was the basis of the argument? What, like, we were talking, I know we were talking about was it just how would a consciousless person behave?
Well, the premise was the hypothesis that the purpose of consciousness was to provide an explanatory illusion of action.
Right. I do remember that. Yep,
so
I remember that.
The premise of starting this, which, like we said, it's a hypothesis. It was like less than a single page of a book that I read. So it was simply hey, this might be the case. Wouldn't that be interesting? Moving on. That's all it was. So there's no actual research into this as far as I understand. But we took it and ran with it as we do. And So a lot of that was under that pretense. If they were unconscious, they wouldn't be able to explain their action. But let's strip it of the hypothesis and try to now just say, what would a consciousless entity be? Let's just say from birth. And as I was saying, go ahead.
But a consciousless being could store memories. Or is that up for debate?
That's the thing, though, is perceptions don't necessarily mean memories. Because, like we said, you can have a perception, like smelling a hot dog. It could never enter consciousness. And you're going to have a later action that perception influences. Also unconscious of the perception. And you're never going to have a memory of smelling that hot dog. So there is something being stored for sure, but it's not always a memory. For like we know this to be the case. Our brain is taking in just infinite amounts more data than we could ever consciously think. So, and that's not just being blown up in a nothingless void. Like, that's being stored somewhere.
Okay. I feel like I kind of remember where at least you had concluded. I think you concluded that you wouldn't be able to articulate your actions, and probably, as we're talking about now, maybe even have memories stored. You as an entity, a consciousless entity, would be acting off of pure instinct, but that instinct is altered or evolved by past experience.
Yeah, which is the case for us anyway.
Right. It's just we have a easier time of either talking about or making up a reason for why we do it.
Memory is a requirement of consciousness, I think, because, like I said, if you have blacked out and are no longer storing memories, it is the same as if you were unconscious and you wouldn't be able to tell.
Because, well, there are people with memory loss issues, like severe memory loss issues, and you wouldn't say they're unconscious when they're acting or when they're moving or interacting with the world. You wouldn't say they're unconscious.
But when they try to remember themselves doing that, they probably would.
It's as if you might as well have been unconscious, but they weren't.
Well, how do we know that, though, is the thing. Let's say, okay, someone with Alzheimer's forgets. They're in a perpetual state of forgetting the last 5 minutes, which unfortunately is a real thing. So their memory is every 5 minutes, the previous 5 minutes, that memory stops recording and all that data gets thrown away.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I don't know if that data actually does get thrown away. The perception data of it. The memory of it happening does. But if
because, I mean, this is a part of, like, memory loss patients, I'm pretty sure. Like, a lot of it you just lose, but that's a part of the therapy is getting people accustomed, and over time they, can break through that. And I think a lot of that not only comes down to the healing mind, but also just because the brain, I think there's different. I'm not a neuroscientist at all by any means. I hope nobody thought that of me.
We aren't any form of any scientist.
But I feel like there is so many different parts of the brain that some sort of storing could even happen, even if the entire memory is thrown out. Some sort of pathway.
Well, we know that
in the
to
brain.
be the case because, or at least Well, I can't really say that, but I assume that to be the case because animals have, like I said, the brain is storing stuff. The brain is storing stuff, way more stuff than we can ever fit in a conscious thought, right?
Mm.
There are just an infinite amount of perceptions that our brain takes in, and that data doesn't go away. That data is stored, but we're never
Yeah.
going to have a memory of it, right? The same
Right.
for like an animal. An animal is going to have perceptions from past experience that it's going to act differently on in the future because of those perceptions.
Mm.
But does it have a memory? I guess. Like, what is a memory?
I mean, it's perception recollection, or like it's the brain's ability to
It's
vividly recall.
recalled
It's
perception.
data recall. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. But we also know, we know that when you're thinking of a memory, it is a reconstruction. When you try to think of something in the past, it is reconstructed under new circumstances. And as you think about it more and more and more, it is reconstructed differently every time. It's not a true recall. It's a reconstruction.
Unless you have what they would call a photogenic memory, which
Photographic
is probably
memory, yeah.
photographic memory. You're right. it's those memories where you look really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's a photo. So you have people with photographic memory, which I think those are the people that can at the very least reconstruct incredibly well.
Right. Yeah, I don't know the science behind that. I don't know if it's a true recall or I don't know if it's just a way better reconstruction. But we do know that if a bunch of people, I mean, this is documented a billion times throughout a billion different ways. If a bunch of people have all the same experience, and then a year later you go and ask each one individually, it's going to be reconstructed in a very different way by each person.
Mm-hmm.
Or even the same person at different points in time. So memory itself is a reconstruction, not a recall. But so I guess we're just back to the question of what is memory then? Because you can't reconstruct. Well, can you reconstruct a memory of something that you weren't conscious to in the moment? I think you can.
I think that gets back to what is consciousness. Because you can't, because we're just saying, because we could just say like, oh, if somebody that's blackout drunk is, if they can recall it, then whatever. But like being blackout, you're not making memories, but does that exclude you from consciousness? You're not present. But are you though? Like if you're out walking around doing stuff, you just can't remember it later.
Yeah,
That doesn't necessarily mean you're unconscious, unless you're passed out on the floor and
right.
nobody-
It's in the same way that you wouldn't look at a person with Alzheimer's as unconscious just because
Right.
they won't consciously remember the things that they have done at a future time.
I think a lot of this is which is unsurprising, is we're having a difficult time defining what consciousness is. Which
We
is,
come back to
again,
that
which is
quite
unsurprising.
often. Right. So back to the question of, can you remember something that you were unconscious of in the moment? And I think the answer is yes. Because if you this is hard to translate from brain to mouth here. If you experience something and you think back to that experience, there are things that you can notice in hindsight that you did not notice in the moment.
Say that one more
Do you
time.
think? If you experience a perception or as we do, a conglomerate of millions of perceptions.
Mhm.
But you're focused on one. In the future, if you then recall that moment, I believe that you can recall a perception that you weren't conscious of in the moment. You can, if you see, let's say you're at a construction site and a crane like falls on a guy. Let's make this a tragedy. If you're at a construction site and you see a crane fall on a guy, you're probably going to be pretty laser focused on like just one or two things on the crane falling on the guy. But in the future, if you think back to that memory, you might be able to notice that before the crane fell on the guy, you saw another guy blowing up the supports of the crane that you weren't conscious of in the moment.
Right, but here's the thing. I would argue that you're conscious for all of it. Unless we're defining consciousness as strictly what enters the actively monitoring part of your brain, whatever that may be, and that's your consciousness, but you are a conscious entity experiencing all things.
Well, that's how your perceptions are always perceiving. The data is always being gathered, but you're not always conscious of the data.
Are we defining consciousness as only what is most active, the focus of
what
the brain?
is entering the mind, so to speak? That's what I have understood. Like, what if that's not what? How can it be anything else? If consciousness is not simply just its contents, the mind, what you're thinking about. What else could it? I wouldn't say that I'm conscious of the temperature in the room 99% of the time, or breathing. I wouldn't say I'm conscious of those things happening unless I focus my conscious attention to it.
No,
right?
Like there's a difference between, like, some people say things like, it was a conscious thought or not a conscious thought. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But then we've had discussions where you've said something like, can we really know if animals are conscious?
Right.
So do they not have a thought in their brain? Like, is that what we're saying? Because clearly animals think.
Right. Because think
in the sense of like, want food, get food.
Yeah. They think, they reason. The brain shoots neurons that fights itself, and the top one wins.
If we're defining consciousness as simply the ability to have active present thought,
sorry to cut you off, but animals don't have the ability to think about their thoughts and realize that they're thinking about their thoughts, and realize that they're thinking about their thoughts. That, as far as we understand, that is not an ability of animals. And that is what I understand consciousness to be. Introspection. The fact that we can think of a triangle and literally see it, but there's nothing there. A mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously the perception of the temperature in the room is data that's being gathered by my brain. It's a perception. Yeah. But 99% of the time, that is not something in the mind that I am conscious of. That's what I think consciousness is. That's what I think of it to be. So I am unconscious to the temperature of the room. And when I have no memory at all, I am unconscious to everything.
So is there two layers of consciousness then? Because
what would be the second layer?
Because you're saying consciousness is what is present in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But consciousness is also the thought of thinking.
Well, that's not an extra layer. That's just simply more contents of consciousness.
But it has to be both.
think you can have one without the other. No, I don't. When you say both,
I mean, you certainly can though, because we just talked about animals who can think presently,
no,
but
but we
not
don't
think
know
of
if
thoughts.
no, we don't know if they're thinking thoughts. They can think in the way that the brain reasons based on past perceptions, if that's what you mean by thinking. But I don't think that they can think of a triangle and see the triangle when there's nothing there.
So you're thinking more of I don't even know the word. I'm grabbing.
I don't think they
for
have a
here.
mind where they can think of a word in cat, right? I don't think they can have a mind that can think of what's going to happen in the future and picture it.
Do we know that that's true?
Well, we know
Because I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's untrue. I feel like there's maybe a little bit more going on in certain animals' minds than that.
Well, we know that there's more processing going on based on the size of the brain.
Right.
We know that animals... See, I don't think that they can think in the way that we currently are talking about thinking, where you can picture an image and literally see it when it doesn't exist, or think of a word or a sentence and then say it, or something like that.
Okay, so we can...
So go ahead.
For the sake of argument, then, we can... To get... Because I feel like consciousness is an ambiguous term in some regards. I feel like there's different definitions.
The fact that for the last 50 episodes we've had this conversation, maybe most of those, and haven't landed on a consensus is proof of that fact.
Well, let's land on, at least for right now, a consensus. So for the sake of argument, because I don't know if I necessarily agree with that definition of consciousness, but what I can agree with is that there's a difference between intelligence and complex intelligence. As in, an animal is intelligent in the sense that it can intake perception and learn, so to speak, and alter behavior due to perception. But humans are complicatedly intelligent because of the more introspection, analyzing thought, and what we've really been talking about. If we're going to say that consciousness is simply complex intelligence, somebody without complex intelligence... What was the original goddamn question? What are we talking about?
Well, I don't think consciousness is simply complex intelligence.
I don't either.
I think you can have complex intelligence the same way that we do, where the amount of perceptions you intake is an unbelievable number. Therefore, and since we know that there is no perception that is not linked to action, the actions that we take are based on that unlimited number of perceptions.
When I say complex, I don't mean basic. Well, I mean not imaginative and introspective based is what I mean.
What do you define introspection to be? Imagination, I think that's a totally different thing. But introspection, right. What do you define that as?
The ability to analyze and process again, we're going to use this word, on a conscious level, be able to analyze thought, personal thought.
Right, being able to think about a thought.
Yeah.
And realize you just thought about it.
That's what I'm talking about is complex intelligence. That is intelligence.
I don't think that's complex intelligence. I think that's just consciousness.
I'm just putting a word on it. I didn't pull out a dictionary and make sure it all lined up. I'm just putting a word associated. Okay, well then that answers the question then, because the reason I was doing that is to get rid of this barrier of what is conscious, what is not. So you're just saying what I'm calling a more complicated version of intelligence, you're saying is consciousness.
I think so. When
And
you
then
say complex intelligence, you think of introspection, as you
Yeah.
said earlier. And I don't think that that's the case. I think introspection is the ability to think about a thought, which is itself consciousness, in my view.
I would almost go so far as to say that if we are complexly intelligent and an animal is non-complexly intelligent, that distinction is complex versus non-complex consciousness.
See, why I don't understand why that distinction needs to be made at all. I think why not just say we have a brain and its ability to crunch numbers is its complexity. And its complexity increases with the ability.
Because consciousness to me, and it's in the way I've understood it to be my entire life, is the awakeness.
The fact that the lights are on at all.
Exactly. That is
Right,
conscious.
That's yeah, me too. The fact that it feels
Then how
like,
couldn't animals be conscious?
I have no idea. I have because we don't
You
know
have
how
said that
we're
before.
because we don't know how we are conscious. We don't know
No,
anything
no, no, no,
about
no,
it.
no. If I'm saying if the definition of consciousness is the lights are on,
Yeah.
I would say it's pretty clear that the lights are on as far as an animal is concerned.
How do you know that my lights are on right now?
I mean, I don't. What is this simulation theory? What is this? Like,
No,
what do you?
how do you just said it's clear to you that an animal's lights are on. How is it clear to you that my lights are even on?
Because I can see you interacting with me and thinking for yourself. I'm not.
You can see my thoughts?
I can see that thoughts are being processed.
You can see that data is being processed? Yeah.
I don't have your brain open to analyze the neurons, but I could make a pretty good guess at that something's going on in there.
Right. You can make a good guess that neurons are being fired.
Yeah,
Which
same
has
thing for an animal.
the fact that neurons are being fired has nothing to do with consciousness. What you wouldn't be able to do is dig into my brain and find the consciousness. What you wouldn't be able to
It's
do
not there.
yeah, maybe I'm not conscious, and you wouldn't know is the thing. You wouldn't.
Well,
No,
in the same exact way that I couldn't know if I'm conscious.
Hold on, pause. My dad is calling.
Oh my god. I want to get a firm definition on consciousness, which is a difficult thing to do, as you might.
Okay, yeah,
imagine.
That's a good substratum to start building.
So I'm currently looking at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and I feel like this is an all right.
Dude, that has been my favorite website for the last like 5 months.
Okay,
There's so much good stuff on there.
So the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but essentially I'm in. What even am I looking at? It's huge, is what I'm.
I was gonna say they probably have a 100-page
So-
essay on it.
So yeah, okay. So this is just titled Consciousness. And it is, I don't know how many pages it is, but it's huge. So I'm looking at section 2, subsection 1, creature consciousness. Okay.
Okay.
And they break up consciousness into 3 main categories. I think they go on a little bit, but 3 main categories. There is sentience, there is wakefulness, and then there is self-consciousness.
And the third
So
tier is what it would say we have.
Correct. Yeah. So sentience, it may be conscious in a generic sense of simply being a sentient creature, one capable of seeing and responding to the world. So that is, in their definition, a form of consciousness, just a lower level of consciousness. Wakefulness is similar. What was it? One further requires
Wakefulness.
So wakefulness. They might. So this is so if your requirements of consciousness. So we have sentience. That's the base level. Similar to that, but a little bit more. One might further require that the organism actually be exercising such a capacity rather than merely having the ability to do so. So they are conscious. So a sentient thing is conscious, but there's nothing to do about it. But wakefulness is conscious and being able to interact with their consciousness in a way. And then self-consciousness is what we have, the ability to
That sort of
think
thinking
of
about
thoughts.
thoughts and stuff.
This is how I think of consciousness.
Wakeful. Go back to the wakefulness. Is there a reducibleness to the wakefulness part? I didn't really kind of get that. As
One might further require that the organism actually be exercising such a capacity rather than merely having the ability to do so. So there's a thus. Thus, one might count it as conscious only if it were awake and normally alert. And I think it just kind of goes on from there. It doesn't really say, but it's all it's saying is awake and normally alert is, in a way, consciousness, wakefulness.
So sentience was just being a entity, being a something that is alive, right? Including a plant.
Yeah.
Because we do know plants can act on changes in their environment, just like an animal can.
So one capable of sensing and responding to the world.
Okay, so yeah, plants are what's considered the lowest level. Just an alive thing.
Yeah, an alive thing would be the lowest level of
an
conscious.
animal.
And this isn't necessarily saying that all of these levels should be the generic definition of consciousness, but it's going through what a person might require to call something consciousness.
Okay.
Now, would I go around boasting that, I think my plant in this pot is a sentient creature? I wouldn't say that, or a conscious creature. I wouldn't say that because that's not very helpful.
I would say, even colloquially, just calling it sentient, I think, is a bit far, even though it, in this definition, it is.
Yeah. So I guess personally, I could see how they would put these here. I could see how a person would maybe make that argument. For me, wakefulness would be the definition of consciousness, and then
So
self-consciousness
wakefulness is animal.
Yes, and then self-consciousness is what I was talking about. Complex intelligence. That's what I was trying to get a definition going there. That's what I'm talking about.
So wakefulness is sentience. So I guess I'm still stuck on wakefulness. Wakefulness is sentience with the ability to act, even though sentience is
it's like
acting on your environment. I guess I don't understand.
But the thing is that part of sentience is being able to respond to the world, which plants do that.
Yeah.
Which that's then you get into what's the difference between an animal and a plant, and it's.
So, reread the wakefulness part again. I'm struggling how there's a difference between the wakefulness and the sentience part.
One might further require that the organism actually be exercising such a capacity rather than. It's weird that be exercising such a capacity. It's like they're referring back to.
It's saying how I understand what it's saying is sentience is the ability to act and respond to your environment, and wakefulness is simply the difference between knowing that your environment is changing and acting.
Yeah. I just sent you this excerpt. I just sent it to you if you want to look at that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, just a quick side note on the philosophy, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Bro, anything you look up that is related to philosophical just topic, they probably have a actual essay book with like 50 different book references at the very bottom of it. I did this in regards to faith. Faith is a huge blog on it. Like,
Jeez.
Faith is enormous, that what they have to say about that one. So I guess I don't know what is sentient but not wakeful under these definitions. Sentience, generic sense of simply being a sentient creature. But what is there such a thing? One capable of sensing and responding to its world? Yes. Wakefulness. One might further require that the organism actually be exercising such a capacity rather than merely having the ability or disposition. What the hell entity has the disposition to act but doesn't?
I don't know. I bet there's an answer, but I don't know.
Right. So I guess I think that being sentient, being an alive thing, already puts you into the wakefulness part, as far as I can understand. Because there is no sentient alive thing that doesn't, maybe a bacteria. If we're getting microscopic, that's an alive
might
thing.
as well get microscopic, yeah.
Would that be, and then wakefulness starts at like the plant level type of thing?
I don't know if I'd say a plant is wakeful. I don't know.
But even on the level of bacteria are 100% agents of their environment. A bacteria is never going to not do anything if stimulus is provided. So like, even at the microscopic, it's going to react to its environment. So I don't know, like a virus is the definition of reacting to its environment. It mutates, it does all these things that it wouldn't do if it were not for its environment. So like, even at the microscopic, life seems to be at the wakefulness level of exercising its capacity to act on the environment.
I will say this. It says at the top of it, I didn't copy and paste this because I just kind of glossed over it. It says it right before this block of text that separates out these three ideas. It says, an animal, person, or other cognitive system may be regarded as conscious in a number of different senses. So it says a animal, person, or other cognitive system. That's its qualifier.
Okay, so cognitive implies brain, I think.
That would make sense, yeah.
A bacteria doesn't have a brain.
So we're talking about the levels of consciousness within cognitive beings.
So, okay, well, that makes me wonder, where the heck is the data processing happening in a plant? Because we know that, I mean, plants can react to how close another plant is to it. Like, plants are kind of smart. Like, they know stuff, and they close up and stuff when an animal's nearby in some scenario, like, depending on the plant. I've heard that before. Don't quote me on that.
I looked up how does a plant process data, and it thought I meant manufacturing plant. So that's the answer I got.
So like, it's doing information processing, but like, where is that happening? It doesn't have a brain. I don't know. I have no idea. This is
and
a level
I feel like 30 seconds of Googling isn't going to give me the right answer.
Yeah, this seems a bit too into it to get a quick answer for.
The moral of the story when it comes to this,
God, dude, this is so crazy.
Is I'm thinking if we're going to just use what I sent you as a baseline for defining consciousness, you expect consciousness to fall into the self-consciousness tier. That is consciousness for you.
Yes.
And yeah. I would say more along the lines of wakefulness is how I would define it.
Okay.
And I would then subdivide self-consciousness as consciousness, but just a higher evolution of it, a higher form.
So Annika Harris recently wrote a book called Lights On, and previously has written a book called Conscious. I have not read either one of them. I intend to read both of them. She has, for like 20 plus years, researched consciousness. And she is not of this tiered hierarchical view of consciousness. She is, I don't know if she has the same conception of it that I do, but she is either you have it or you don't. It's very binary in that way. Her idea of it. So I mean, she, like I said, she's been researching it for 20 years. She knows a lot about more than I do, way more about it than I do. But also, I know the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy doesn't just willy-nilly post something. Like, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you will find like 50 freaking books of references. So, like, if that doesn't tell you that we still have no freaking clue what consciousness is, then I don't know what does.
Right.
But yeah, I guess I can't remember where I was going with that. Other than Annika Harris is of the view consciousness is binary. You either have it or you don't. And there's not varying levels of it. There is simply the ability. I guess I'm not super sure what she would say about that on the levels of consciousness.
Well, here's
why
what
she
we'll
doesn't
do.
believe it, but
Here's what we'll do. We'll have this. What the heck was I reading? What was I reading? What was that? The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Yeah.
We'll have this linked in the description if any of you want to follow the link and read what we were just very smallly reading from it. It's like I said, there's just about 1 billion things you could read in this one article alone. But
in fact, let's just shout out the entire website here. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. If you are at all interested in just about anything philosophical, search that. Like, you can find panpsychism in there, idealism, all these things that we've talked about, even like faith, all these things that we've talked about that have a philosophical implication. There is a probably enormous article written about it in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So, such a incredible resource for philosophical information. But I don't know where you and I were going with this and how we started it. I think it was on the somewhere along the lines of memory and how it is a requirement of consciousness, maybe.
Yeah.
But so this is, I have had this question written down that seemed kind of stupid to ask in most scenarios, but it seems a little bit appropriate in this scenario. So I guess we'll transition into that, and then we can put a stop to this blabbering of things we don't understand. If your eyes were in your dick, would you think that you are in your dick? We're deep enough into this now that no one's going to get mad for me saying dick. I asked that, so, you know, Jimmer, we've had Jimmer on the podcast.
Jim,
I did actually ask,
show,
I did actually ask Jimmer this, and it was quite a lot of thought going on, because it's a bit of an interesting question, actually. But he basically came to the loose conclusion that if we were inside of our dicks, or if we saw out of our dicks and other people looked into our dicks to look at us instead of just like looking up at our faces, you know,
Yeah.
then we would eventually start to feel like we were inside of our dicks. But not because we're seeing out of them, but because other people are looking at us into them.
I think the first thing you need to really get nailed down is, where do you feel now? Do you feel in your brain, or is your body a whole entity?
How I've understood it, how I have in general understood most people to understand this, is they think they are a sort of their self. Again, anybody that's watched this, probably most episodes, I have said it on numerous occasions. I don't think the self exists, but it feels like your self is in your head. I feel this is certainly the case for me. I feel like I exist somewhere inside my head, somewhere behind my eyes. Right. But, and I think that's the general consensus. People believe that where they exist is somewhere inside their heads. But is that just because that's where our eyes are, or is that because that's where our processor is, our brain? Like, why do we feel like we're up there?
Well, so like I was just thinking, like imagine we tied a sheet around your neck and it like extended out across the room. And you could see
Where is this going?
You could only see over the sheet.
Okay.
Like your body is underneath you and you kind of know that. But I feel like anybody would feel like they're over the sheet. You see my illustration?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic model of feeling like where you would exist if you could not see neck down.
Mm-hmm.
You'd feel like your neck up.
But alternatively, if your eyes were in your dick and you had a sheet around the room at your waist,
would you think you're under the sheet?
I think you'd have to, wouldn't you?
But here's the thing. Your auditory perception would still be in your ears.
Ooh, that does complicate things. Yeah. Because,
right.
Well, shoot. I mean, let's think about your senses. You've got right here, you've got sight, hearing, and taste.
And scent.
And scent.
We've got a clump of huge perceptions, some of the fundamental perceptions all up here.
The only thing you don't have up there is touch, specifically via fingers and hands. That's all. That's all you don't have.
Touch.
Which arguably you can touch with any part of your body.
Right. The sense of touch is your whole body, but the core senses everywhere else are up in your head. So if just one of them moved somewhere else. So if you're seeing out of your dick, hearing and tasting and smelling up here,
let's expand my example.
Wait. We can do this. We can do this. We can do this right now.
Okay.
If I put a camera in your dick and then I wore a VR headset on my eyes that was a live feed through your dick, we can do that. Let's say so let's put it on my dick because this is the example that we're talking about here. A baby is born. Instantly, strap a camera to its dick. Put a VR headset on it. Now it is that. Let's say in the far future where a VR headset is an implant in the eyes. Okay. And it's a instant zero latency feed to their dick.
Yeah.
From the moment of birth.
Mm-hmm.
What would that, we can already get a glimpse of that today through VR headsets. Our perception, our other perceptions are still going to be in our head, but our visual field is going to be somewhere else. Now, I'll tell you right now, it's not very convincing what we have today. But if it
Well,
was
I was gonna say if you go your whole life, and obviously the baby example would be a little bit more compelling, but like if we were to try that as an example, it it wouldn't work because we already have
we
the
have a
preconceived.
lifetime of
Yeah.
building up visual perception, through our head.
So I don't know if you. But here's the problem: that we can think about this baby and its dick, but but we have no real basis to understand that.
No.
It's a good example, but how do you? Because now I could just be like, oh well, the hearing is up here, so clearly it doesn't think. But you don't know.
You don't know.
I also think though. As far as like balance is concerned, is that all governed also by the brain?
Balance has a lot to do with our ears.
It's the ears. I remember hearing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No pun
How
intended.
our ears have our our ears have a lot to do with balance. But here's the other thing. Our visual field is also already such a massive construction of the brain. So what is it? Our lens like eyes, doesn't the light actually enter our cornea or whatever the heck it's called upside down? And the brain reconstructs a correct image?
That sounds familiar.
I think something like that. But also, as we like look up and down, if we like flicked our eyes all over the place, our brain inserts a black image, a black construction of what it is, because without that, we would get extremely nauseous.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're like looking one way or the other, our brain is constructing an image of what we're seeing. It's not actually there.
Right.
Also, if we're staring at most of what we see is a construction, even when we're not looking one way or the other, because some things like on the side of our view, if we've seen it before, our brain knows what to put there and it constructs it. So much of our visual field is already neural illusions.
But does it matter when it comes to the perception of your location? Part of me wants to say it does, and you live where your brain is.
But the thing is,
I don't know
we wouldn't
why.
even know that we have a brain if
Yeah,
we
that's
didn't
the thing.
if we didn't
I
open
almost feel
ourselves
like
up.
I almost feel like if your brain was where your heart is, it wouldn't. You'd still be up here.
Like if you
know what I'm
swap the
saying?
two. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We wouldn't, if we didn't cut open dead versions of ourselves, we wouldn't even know that we have a brain or a heart or whatever. So
Yeah,
that I don't think that because our brain is up here, that can be the reason why most people feel like they exist in their head.
I feel like the simplest answer to this is if we didn't, kind of like what you're saying, if we didn't know anything about anatomy, your eyes are where you are always. I think. Because why would you be anywhere else?
So where does someone blind from birth feel like they are?
Their mouth? They speak? They hear?
Ooh.
I bet you that's it. I bet
They
you.
associate themselves from. So they would be able, based on them speaking through their mouth, they would know where the location of their mouth is relative to their ears.
Right.
So they can make the connection there. So they would probably I think you might be right. They would feel like they exist still somewhere in the head, but maybe not like behind the eyes.
But if
as
their
typical.
mouth was on their dick.
But if their mouth was on their dick. We have looped this around to mouth on dick.
We looped it around to still impossible to answer.
Yeah.
Just differently. I think Jimmer's onto something. I think how people, because where you are almost doesn't matter. It's how people interact with you that give you a sense of identity.
Yeah. So if everybody looked at your dick, yeah.
If you're up here and everybody looked at your dick, well then no. But,
Okay,
but at the same time,
but
though,
yeah, if your eyes are up here, but everybody looked at your dick, you probably in that scenario you wouldn't feel like
nobody be looking at you. Yeah,
right.
That's the thing.
I don't think that's how it would be. But if your eyes were, but if your eyes were in your dick, but if everyone looked up at your eyes in your head, not your dick eyes, then would you feel like you're in your dick?
You'd think it'd be like you're watching somebody look at something else when you're talking to them. They wouldn't be looking at you.
So okay, so where you're seeing out of seems to be imperative here.
I think you can't have perception without it, which is literally true by definition. Right. So yeah.
Visual
so I mean,
perception, yeah.
You are where your eyes are, but I think that just
someone that's blind, it obviously doesn't matter where they're being looked at.
That's true. It doesn't matter. And so their best approximate, if I had to, I'm not blind, but if their best approximation of where they are is the source of their communication, which is their mouth. And I think you're right.
Assuming that.
I think, and I think you're probably right where mouth to ear connection establishes
some sort of central self, probably.
Yeah.
Somewhere. So, okay. Blind and deaf from birth. They wouldn't, okay, well, maybe that's too far because then they wouldn't even be able to speak. They could. Yeah. They could make noises, but they couldn't get language.
At that point, you could still understand that your mouth is creating vibrations if you were to make noise.
You would be hyper attuned to
now
sound.
Blind, deaf, and mute.
Blind, deaf, and mute. Are they even conscious? Like,
get Helen Keller on the podcast.
Gosh. So what? Okay.
It'd be a terrible guest. I just realized what I just said. That'd be the worst podcast guest you've ever seen in your life.
They wouldn't be able to contribute much, would they? Oh man. Yeah. So, okay. Deaf and mute, but not blind. I think that's pretty clear. They would probably still feel like they're in their head.
Yeah. It all comes back to the eyes.
It all comes back. You're right. It all comes back to the eyes. The eyes seem to. So we know that you could probably still perceive yourself to be somewhere in your head if you're blind by way of connecting your ears and mouth. But as soon as eyes are in the equation, it seems to like take over.
Hold on, though. If your eyes are in your dick and then you speak.
But you're still hearing up here.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this we're back to we can experience this. We're back to the VR example here.
But how do you get bias out of that?
How do you remove bias from that? Yeah. Maybe we just need to start someone on it now and just see what they come back to them in like 10 years and see how are you feeling? Where do you feel like you exist? Do you feel like you're in your dick yet?
It's like they'd be like, I've had to have my pants down so I could see, and I haven't been able to get a job because of it. That's what they'd say.
Probably, yeah. I don't know, man. This is tough. That might
be one of life's unanswerable questions.
I mean, maybe one day it can be, but
I'm really leaning towards the eyes.
You think you're going to feel like you exist somewhere behind your eyes, where your eyes are at?
I think it's your eyes. I think hearing up here and seeing down there kind of throws you a little bit. That's odd. But like,
we already know the brain constructs things to make things make sense. as it
Yeah.
already is. So it would probably make that work if you do it from birth.
Yeah.
Your brain would find a way to make that work.
That's what I think. I think it's the eyes.
So you'd feel okay. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I don't know. Based on the data and information we have to us right now, I think that's the best we can really go. Is just assume that we're probably going to feel like we exist somewhere at or behind our eyes.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great point to stop talking. So let us know, in addition to the question that you want to ask us for a future episode that we will answer.
Yes.
Also let us know, where do you feel like you exist? If you feel like you have a self, like I said, I feel like I have a self. I know after a lot of meditation, some people break that sort of spell, but I know it intellectually. I still feel like I have a self somewhere. Let us know where you feel like you exist in your body, and we'll answer your questions in the next episode. We'll see you then.